Hello, can you hear me? Aha, it's working. So this is my talk titled 90s Website in 2023 in Compose for Science. But who am I kidding? It's not for science, it's for fun. And it's also for all the GIFs, or should I say GIFs, or should I say GIFs? I say GIFs. So there are two kinds of people that play with the Rubik's Cube, right? You get those that sit with their hands on the table. They have a friend with a stopwatch. You hand them the muddled code. They solve the Rubik's Cube, put their hands on the table, and see the time. Then you get the other kind of person, like me. I pick up a Rubik's Cube. I feel the weight. Maybe I flick it around a bit, change some colors. Maybe I investigate how I can remove some of the blocks. My feeling was that if I'm coding during the day in my day job, and I'm sure many of you, I get a problem, I have to sit with my hands on the table, they give me a deadline, I have to solve the problem, hands on the table, deadline met, and there we go. So, what I wanted to do was pick a project that was a bit more like the way I solve a Rubik's Cube, a bit more like I'm looking at a library, figuring out, thinking how I would do something. And so what I did was, I looked at the 90s website aesthetic, and I thought to myself, how would I build that in Compose? So this talk is my journey building this 90s style website in Compose. But we are in Paris, so I am going to go a little bit further back than the 90s. I'm going back to the 80s. And this is a little bit of design history. So to be able to build an authentic looking app that looks like a 90s website, I had a look at the design influences of the 90s. And the design influences of the 90s was the 80s. Now this guy on the left here, I wonder if I can get a laser pointer. This guy, he is called Ettore Sottsass. I think I'm pronouncing it right. And he was part of a design group called the Memphis Design Group. And they worked in Milan, and they made furniture and interiors. And they were their predecessors were the modernists. The modernists said form follows function. But what this Memphis Design Group said was they don't want to do form follows function, they want to do form follows fun. I don't think they said form follows fun, I think they said something like form follows emotion. But they wanted to break away from form follows function. So the kinds of things they did had geometric shapes, pastel colors, strong primary colors, and it was a very distinctive style. And in fact, it was so distinctive that all of the people in the 80s made sweatpants that looked like the Memphis design. I mean, I'm distilling it a bit, but it had a huge influence on the design aesthetic of the 80s. So much so that if you type in Memphis pattern or if you type in 80s, you get hits and everybody can recognize what the 80s looks like. There's another thing that plays into a 90s website, and that is the technology. So you need to look at what the kind of technology was to be able to reproduce that 90s look really accurately. Now this is a screenshot of Netscape Navigator version 2.02 about 1995. Why have I got this on here? Well, the first thing is the fonts that those browsers were using was Times New Roman. Also, this version, 2.02, was the first browser. There were other browsers later, but this was the first browser that could loop a GIF. And this was a browser that had JavaScript in it, which meant you could have like a cursor with snowflakes or some other animation on the cursor. So that's why this is here. Now the GIFs, or the GIFs, come from something in the 80s. In the 80s, they had CompuServe, and people were sharing these images, these little looping images. And in fact, all of these little looping images that you'll see in the further presentation is all extracted from old archives of old 90s websites. So CompuServe had the GIF image file format, and the thing that's important there is, one, it can loop, and two, it only had 256 colors. So the other thing about this web browser is that you could only use web-safe colors. So there's about 216 web-safe colors, so anything I build needs to fit into 216 colors. At the same time, more or less 1995, there was a movement called GeoCities, which allowed people to build their own websites. So it was like, we have all the Memphis design patterns, and now you can build your own website in the Memphis design style. So now I'm going to put together this design history and tech history for you in one slide. I have here a timeline, the version of history, according to me. At the top here, 1981, Memphis design, Rubik's Cubes hit the shelves, and it's about My Little Pony Generation 1 or 2. Then CompuServe appears, 1987, Memphis design ends, mullets, multicolored pants, CompuServe gifts like this inevitable under construction guy. Around about 1990, you get the first web browser, super boring, Times New Roman, maybe a picture. And then there was a troll doll frenzy in the shops at that time. 1994, 1995, Dancing Baby, Looping GIFs, JavaScript, GeoCities free websites. Then we hit the 2000s, going to skip over that, recessions, pandemics, and now we are here, 2023. What do we have in 2023? We have Compose multi-platform, and this is where we are. We also have ChatGPT. Now, I tried to write some of the code in ChatGPT. It didn't work because there wasn't enough Compose stuff in ChatGPT yet. It kept making up parameters, so I couldn't actually use ChatGPT for most of the presentation. So this is the disclaimer slide. So, in my previous talk title, you would have seen on mobile. Now, on my talk title here, I've removed on mobile. And why? Because when I started building this, I found there was Compose multi-platform. So I built the whole system on Android and on desktop, and then compared the two, and then had a look. Here's the thing I want to do. Can I do it in this? Can I do it in that? And what I did was, I put this broken file image in the two apps if there's one that the one can do and one that the other one can't do. But in the end, at about version 1.4.0, I could do everything I wanted to do on both platforms, except the animated GIFs, which only worked on desktop. The other thing that this talk is not, is I am not building a website. So if you want to run this on the web, you have to wait for the multi-platform web version to become unexperimental. So, now I'm going to step into Compose just a little bit. So the whole of Compose drives from state, right? If you change the state, then things can become visible and you can make things change. Here's a screenshot of what the app looks like on Android. If you flick the switch at the top, it changes from Times New Roman to Comic Sans. So for each of my examples, I'm going to have a look at the state, how the state changes. And the other thing I'm going to do is we're going to have a look at the example first, and then you can think in your mind, if you know Compose, how would you code this up? And then we'll have a look and see how I tried to attempt to do it. There is, of course, not only one way of doing something. So that's the process that I'm going to follow. So, but for now, enough talk, more code. And now I'm going to jump into the IDE, you can see there, and I've got, this is the app running on desktop. I think there's a weird thing here with the screen size changing. And there you can see my switch flicking and the font changing. So the first thing I did was choose colors. So here we have some color swatches, and these are the web-safe colors that I chose. I gave them names. Somehow I didn't end up using boiled spinach much, but I did use sherbet bomb quite a bit. So we have some colors. And then the next thing I want to go back again to Memphis Design. So I thought to myself, if I wanted to make a Memphis Design background, because all of those websites had these backgrounds, how would I do it? So there we have a Memphis Design background. But I'm going to slide this out here so we can have a look at state. So you remember I said that if you change the state, then something changes visibly. If the state doesn't change, nothing changes on screen. So we're going to simulate an animation now by changing the state by hand. So I'm making the waves go away, and I'm making the dots be bigger or smaller. So here you can see this looks like an animation, but it's because I'm changing state, and it's because it's me. I'm changing state with a slider. Maybe we'll make that a little bit smaller like that, or we can space them about. So that's one of the core concepts of how animation is done in Jetpack Compose. So let's just switch these on again, and then let's have a quick look at the code. I'm going to move this out of the way. I'll leave the Memphis design on the side. So for the people who are very sleepy and they don't want to look at the code, they can just look at the design. Okay, so this Memphis design composable, it's just a composable, but it takes choices. So the choices is the state. It comes from the side panel. And if you open it up, it's a surface, and it's just got some composables to draw the triangles, the donuts, and the waves. Now, let's see my hotkey foo. If we're looking at the donuts, again, we have some state coming in. You can see here, these are the state parameters coming in, whether they're filled or not. And I'm just drawing them in a box with constraint. Why am I using box with constraints? Because I need the width and the height. Here's the width and the height. Why do I need the width and the height? Because I'm building up a grid of points where I'm going to draw these circles with this method, this Poisson disk points method. And then underneath, to draw the circles, all you really need is a canvas. Looping through the points, draw a circle at the center of the point. I've got some random things for colors, and draw the circles. And the triangles and the waves are drawn in exactly the same way. Okay. So there's one thing, a little aside I'm going to do. So you know those websites on the 90s, they had these repeating JPEGs that are these star fields. Now I thought, let me make a star field in code, and then I made random dots all over the screen, and it looked like that. But if you look at the Memphis design, what I wanted more was like dots that are sort of random, but spread out a little bit. And so this is what's at the bottom here. And this is the one place where ChatGPT did help me, because this algorithm is called the Poisson disk distribution. And I typed into ChatGPT, give me the Poisson disk distribution code in Kotlin. And it gave me 2 objects, and I dropped it in my code, and that's what it looked like, exactly what I wanted. So we are not going to look at that code. What we are going to look at was that, what if I wanted to make the wallpapers be something like this, be like a repeating JPEG? How would I build this in Compose? So we're not animating anything yet, we're just getting the website looking the way, or the screen to look the way we want. So what this is, it's a JPEG that repeats that I found somewhere on an ancient vintage website. So how would you do this? So this blue star box is just a box, so you can put something on top of the box. So it's got the same parameters as box. It takes a content like box would. And then here's the thing. You get an image bitmap by load. This is strange. This is not Android. This is just a wrapper function so that I could get it across the multi-platform, get the resources in for multi-platform. And then I build a brush. And this brush is an image shader. And here's the trick. The trick is, you set the tile mode on X to be repeated and tile mode on Y to be repeated. So now I have a brush, and the brushes are really useful, because a brush, you can put that in a modifier background, or a brush you can use to paint a path inside a canvas, or a brush you can use as a background for a box. So you can use these boxes. If you can set up a brush in a way that you want, you can use it anywhere to do a lot of things. So here we have a box, and the background is a brush, and because these tiles are repeated, you get this repeated effect. So now we have colors, we've got fonts, we've got wallpaper. Now we need a blink tag, because all of those 90s websites, they had a blink tag. So let's have a look and see how the blink tag works. So while I find the right piece of code, have a look at that and think, how would you code up a blink tag? I think I'm at 4, blink tag. Okay, so this blink tag takes text. You can add text there. Blink tag. Blink tag takes a content, so that means you can blink anything. And then inside, one of our first really, really useful animation methods is this remember infinite transition. And what this does, it makes the loop. It's the loop, what would have been the looping GIF, this is what makes the loop. And what I'm asking the animation libraries to do here is I'm saying, please will you forever work out the in-between values for alpha. You should start at 1, then go down to 0, and then reverse yourself up to 1 again. So what this will do, it will give me a state that keeps on changing. So it's like the compose library is pulling a slider like that, and that's what's causing the animation. And then it's really super simple. All I do is take the content with a modifier, and I change the alpha, and that's how that blink works. Now what you'll notice here, the blink is not going on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. It does actually have like a kind of a transition. And how you can control that is by setting keyframes. And then the blink text itself is really just the blink tag with text inside. Now this screen has another little animation hiding behind this ghost. If I click this ghost, you'll see the other ghosts slide down and then start scrolling across the screen. So let me find that for you. So, all right, this is already expanded. Let's see. There. Yeah, let's just go into the, well, no, let's go in here and have a look. So we need some other state. So that state that changes it like that, we need a state. So the state we have there is this state. There's the state. And the state we have here is just a Boolean value, true or false. There's the vulnerable ghost. There's this ghost. And if you click it, the state changes like that. And then depending on that state, what's becoming visible because of that state, here I'm using another animation library, animated visibility, and I'm just showing or hiding the ghosts. What you can't see here is a parameter. So this will by default slide out from the top and slide up from the top, but you can change that. You can make that be all sorts of explosions or fade in or fade out, or like the transition I had on my first slide. So that's how the ghosts work. The next thing a 90s website needs is a visitor counter. So up, down. Because if you're looking here, look at the bottom one. If I go up, the whole composable moves. And if I go down, the whole composable moves. But the ones at the top here, the individual numbers move up and down. So let's go there and I'll have a look. No, 5. So the whole of the cell, if the whole of the cell moves, this is a classic example in the API docs. But basically, I have a number sliding animation, which I've specified over here. And it just says, depending on what the state is, slide in, slide out, fade out. And this you can also obviously change. And then this is the animation library, animated content. And as a transition spec, you tell it how it must slide. And then inside is just the text. So that's this bottom one. And then how would you make the single numbers by themselves? It's just some mathematics, really. I make a row, and then for each of the characters, or each of the numbers, there's some number calculations with powers and things over here, but there's a counter cell for each of these numbers. So this bottom one is like it's repeated for each of the numbers like that. Okay. Visitor counter. What's next on a 90s website is some rainbow text. You have to have rainbow text. But don't worry, we're not going to look at all of the rainbow text. There's too much of it, right? We're only going to look at 3. So that one, the color changes. And this one, the individual numbers, the color changes. And this one has got like a gradient shimmering around it. Now, if we stop for a moment, knowing what we know already, we've got infinite transitions. We can change single values. You can think how you would change the state to make these things rainbow. Let's see. So this is the animation for the rainbow. It takes in a rainbow, which is just a list of colors. it's got our friend, remember, infinite transition. It works out some idea of the interval, like which rainbow color must be where, depending on the duration and the size of the rainbow that you've passed. And then this is the method where I'm asking Compose, I say, Compose, will you please calculate the interim values in between the colors, starting at this one and ending at that one. Now, if I didn't have this animation spec with the keyframes, it would just start at, say, red was in the beginning and blue was in the end, and it would look like this one at the top where it's just two colors. But if I write keyframes like this, I'm taking each of the colors of the rainbow, and I tell it that at a certain interval it needs to have a certain rainbow color, and then it will transition smoothly from color to color to color, transitioning right through the whole of the rainbow, and then you get this one here where the whole text runs. And then we know in the cell example in the visitor counter, what I did there is I split the text up into individual numbers and then applied an animation on each of the numbers with this rainbow text over here. I think it's just, I must open the right one, but it's the same code. Okay, there's the animation, there's the text. I think it's probably that one. Let's have a look. Row, yes, starts with a row. And I'm literally taking each letter in the text and making it be one of those multicolor smooth rainbow texts. So there's that one and that one. Now let's look at, where's the shimmer gradient text? Okay. So this idea for this rainbow text version came from a really nice post by Google DevRel Alejandra about text coloring. Okay, there's the state. Remember infinite transition, we know that already. Now the pattern that you can see happening here is that if there's something that you can set, like a number or a color, it's a possible candidate to be animated. So we've got infinite transition here. I'm animating a float in this case, which is an offset. I'm making a brush, those used for brushes that you can plug in anywhere. What this means with this animation, yes, I'm going to maybe be animating some text, but I could potentially use the same brush, this animating rainbow shimmer brush. I could use it on anything. I could have it as a background for my whole of my app could have this shimmering rainbow text, or it could just be a path that's drawn inside a canvas. And because I'm making the offset change from 0 to some size that I calculated, and the brush is a linear gradient. Now a linear gradient goes from one corner to the other, and the offset will make it be in a different place. I then just use the brush on the text here in the text style. I take its current style, whatever it is, and I copy and I add this brush. And then that will, because the state is changing because of that, and that, it will have this effect on the text. Okay. How much time do I have? So now this one. What do you think we did here? I'll give you a few moments. Well, things are looping, right? So you've got to remember infinite transition, definitely. We've definitely got some gradients going there in this little candy stripe at the top here, and here in the heart, and in this rainbow aura thing that's floating. But can you see there's a black and a gray also changing at the back here? Now, all of that is done exactly the same way as the rainbow text. We can have a look quickly. Okay. Shimmer divider. Infinite transition. Offset. Shimmer brush. Use the brush. Background. Shimmer. And then that's what makes that candy stripe at the top. More spark divider is that one. The brush is already set up. Canvas. Oh, wait, maybe that's not the one. Yes. Okay, here's the state setup. Infinite transition. I'm animating the offset. I'm animating a color. This is the last color. So this is white or black. This is that end color at the end here. So this infinite transition is animating both the offset and the last color. And then the brush here, the colors that it uses spark, which is this inside rainbow there. And then it just adds the last color over there. And that offset will make it move across the screen. I wonder if we have time to show the hot path. No? We can look at the hot path quickly. So hot path has a path, just path setup. I got it from this blog post. That will draw this heart shape. Okay? And then there's colors and a brush, list of colors, shader brush with candy colors. This time I'm not changing anything in the gradient. The gradient just stays fixed. And then how to animate the heart. Infinite transition. There's a scale, this time animating a float. And then the transform scales the heart. And I just draw the path with the brush. Okay. Now, under construction is the other thing a 90s website needs, right? I'm not going to go into the code of this, but this marquee at the bottom is just the same marquee as the ghosts. This yellow and black line going over here is a linear gradient again, with text on top. The one at the top you can see is kind of jumpy, 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 and that's because that was my first implementation, and it actually uses rectangles that are rotated on the canvas and drawn like that. But this is a better solution. The bottom solution is the better solution. Okay, we're on the last one. This one looks like this. Okay. So, for this animation, I'm doing everything by hand. I've got this object, which is a fleck, which is like a fleck of glitter. And it has the property that it calculates where it wants to be next with this next value. And if you ask it to draw itself, it will just draw itself on the canvas. It also has a life, so the lives decrease, so that if you look here, you can see they fade away. They change shape, and then they fall to the bottom, and then they fade away. Okay. So that's the individual particles. And then, let's just do that. Then all of these particles are kept in a state object. And this is not very complicated. All it does, it also has this next method. And all it does is for each of the particles of glitter that it has, it will just call next on all of them. But now, how does this get kicked off? How does this actually hit and trigger the state animations? Now, I did a very inefficient, yet useful and manual way to do the update. Launched effect launches a coroutine. It's tagged on visible, so you can switch it off. And then while it's visible, I'm using this with frame millis. So what this means is that every single time a frame comes in, I get it to update the state. So it's on every tick. So super inefficient, but on every tick, it's actually going to move the particles all over. And then how does this drag thing work? How does it update when I'm dragging? I've got a box. This is this little, I think it's this is the little magenta box, which is that little cursor thing there. It uses pointer input. It detects a drag gesture. And then when it sees that it's been dragged, it will update the glitter state. An update. So this update source basically updates the XY position of where this is sitting. Okay. So now we've got all the pieces. Let's see. I have another special switch here, which will change it all into a 90s website. Okay. I told you that the animated GIFs do not work on Android. So you can say to me, well, this looks very flashy, Maia, but you've just filled the whole screen with animated GIFs. Now, I put an Easter egg behind this text. If I click this, all the animated GIFs go away. So now you can see these are the animations that were left from creating the 90s website. We've got that, we've got the blink text, we've got a visitor counter at the bottom here, we've got some rotations. So let's just bring that back. Okay, and these websites, all of them, have guest books. So here I made a fake guest book to just give you this, instead of giving you a bullet point slide of what the summary of all the things are that I'm using, I've given you a guest book here. So the first sort of key concept is if you want to animate something, you need to change the state. The next one is I see numbers and colors I want to animate. So that actually just opened my mind that there's so much more. I can animate anything that I can change. I can animate. I love Compose multi-platform, nothing more to say there. I never knew Memphis was a thing. And the 90s nostalgia heats up my computer. And that's because of these endless loops. And then there's also, I can submit. Now I know some people's eyes might be twitching because these things aren't aligned, right? But when I looked at those GeoCities websites, they weren't really aligning their guest books either. So I thought this is a more authentic experience of the guest book to not align the text. So now, bookmarks, of course they have bookmarks. So I've categorized these bookmarks into the years, and there's a Git repo. I don't know if my internet's working, yes. So if you want these actual bookmarks, if you want the code, that's the Git repo. But let me just go back to the slides for a minute and give you a quick summary. So this is the screen, which just gives you a summary of all the techniques and where they were used. We've had rainbow shimmer text at the back here, linear gradient, remember infinite transition, it's going to appear again. Basic marquee, lots of remember infinite transitions with different things that are being animated. Animated content, linear gradients, animated float, launched effect with frame millies canvas, shader brush, image shader. So those are the words that if you wanted to look and read up about it, that's what you would type into Google to do more research on what you want to do. So, but now comes the point, right? It isn't 1995, it is 2023. So what does this all mean to me? On the one hand, the lesson I took from this was, sometimes I need to just play with something and just try something out and look for creative ways to do that. Because it's just so energizing and it actually changes the way I do my other day-to-day Rubik's Cube style code as well if I just take a break and code because I love to code, not code because I want to solve a specific problem for a specific deadline. That's the one key takeaway. The other key takeaway is that if you think about your app as having some other state that you want to communicate to your user, right? So it's a conversation. My app is having a conversation with the user or the customer. And the animations are just like the body language, right? I could say, click here, or I do something and they smile. It's similar to having the body language on a human in the conversation that you have with your customer. So the animations can help you communicate what's happening under the hood in your app. Now, if we look at this, what does this communicate? This is someone dancing to talking heads with a mullet and bright baggy pants. But your app doesn't have to have that personality. Just like we all have different personalities and different body language, you can use exactly the same techniques and have something that's more subtle and more appropriate to your app and your brand. Now, if you look at the screen and you think about 90s websites, by the way, this is the one on Android, I didn't run it on iOS because I was a little bit afraid that the iOS usability police would come and find me. There is still something missing on the screen. You can't imagine what it could be. All of those 90s websites had super cheesy MIDI soundtracks. Okay? I was not brave enough to approach multi-platform MIDI and sound at this point. I might in the future, but just in case anyone was looking for that kind of effect, I've prepared a really cheesy Spotify playlist. And there's the link to my Git repo and a QR code for all of the links, all of the code, all of the experiments, and the Spotify playlist. I have 11 minutes left. Do you want to see the under construction code? No, you don't want to see the under construction code. I think I'll take questions now. Yeah?